When my father died, he left behind a will, a house, and 3 siblings who had not spoken a civil word to each other in 11 years. None of that started with money. All of it ended there. The inheritance was not the problem. The silence before it was.
I'm Ryan.
And I'm Ashley. Welcome to Honestly English, where the conversations that matter most in life get the precision they deserve. The inheritance conversation is the one most families never have, and the cost of that silence is almost impossible to calculate until it's too late.
Today we're asking why inheritance disputes are almost never actually about money. What adult children are really looking for when a parent is gone, and the exact difference between a legal plan and a legacy plan.
Most families have one of those. Almost none have both.
And there is something I want to come back to later in this episode, about a conversation I had with my own father that I kept postponing for reasons I told myself were practical. They weren't. I've thought about it differently since we started building this one. I'll say more when we get there.
I want to start with a moment rather than a theory. The week after my father's funeral, there was a folder on the kitchen table. Legal documents. His estate plan. And I remember having this very precise thought. This folder is not the problem we're about to have. It's just the occasion for it.
What do you mean by the occasion?
The assets became proxies, stand-ins for decades of conversations that had never happened. Who was his favorite? Who had sacrificed the most? Who had been truly seen, and who had spent years feeling invisible? The estate plan was completely silent on all of that. It was never designed to answer those questions. And when it couldn't answer them, the family tried to extract the answers anyway. From percentages, from property lines, from who got the watch.
The inheritance becomes the final exam, and everyone's scoring it on a rubric the parent never saw.
Exactly. And what makes this so psychologically precise is the concept of narrative coherence, the private internal story each adult child carries about who they were in the family, what their presence and sacrifice amounted to, what they were owed, not financially, but emotionally. These stories accumulate across decades. They are almost never compared. 2 siblings can grow up in the same house with the same parents and carry completely incompatible versions of what that family was.
And nobody finds that out until there's a folder on the table.
Right. Now layer loss aversion on top of that. Human beings feel losses roughly twice as intensely as equivalent gains. You're already in grief, and then you receive what feels like an ambiguous financial decision from someone who is no longer alive to explain it.
The explanation you reach for, in that state, is never the most charitable one.
Almost never. Because without transparency, without any visible intention, the default interpretation is confirmation of everything you were already afraid of. That you mattered less. That your years of presence weren't measured.
I had a colleague, mid-60s, extraordinarily capable, who came to me not for professional advice, but because he could not understand his own anger. His mother had left the family home to his sister and split everything else equally among the 3 children. By any external standard, a fair, considered plan. But he was consumed. Not by the house, because for 9 years his sister had been the one who showed up. Every medical appointment, every 3 a.m. call, every holiday he and his brother found a reason to miss. And there was nothing, anywhere in the estate, no letter, no notation, not a single line that said, "I saw what this cost her." It meant something.
That acknowledgement was the inheritance she needed.
Not a larger share. The visibility. The proof that her presence had registered somewhere.
And this is the distinction the entire conversation turns on. A legal plan says, here is what happens to my assets. It distributes. It is precise, it is binding, and it is almost entirely silent on the question of why. A legacy plan says, "Here is why. Here is what I believed about each of you. Here is what I saw. Here is what I hope you'll understand about the decisions I made." Most families have the first one and assume it is sufficient. It never is, because a document makes a terrible speaker. It has no tone, no warmth, no context. It says what. It never, ever says why.
And when there's no why, the family writes one, built from old wounds, fresh grief, and no margin for complexity.
There's also a layer here I think of as legacy pressure. The way unresolved family dynamics quietly shape financial decisions nobody ever admits to out loud. The child who receives more because the parent carried guilt about something that was never processed between them. The sibling who receives less because of a wound so old it's become structural, absorbed into the furniture of the family. These are not legal decisions. They are emotional decisions dressed in legal clothing.
And the cognitive dissonance that follows, holding both, "I believe my parent loved me equally," and "this document suggests otherwise." The mind resolves that tension, and it almost never resolves it in the direction of charity.
It resolves it in the direction of the wound, every time.
Which is what legacy thinking is designed to prevent.
The preparation, the conversation, the letter, the visible intention requires a specific kind of epistemic humility, the willingness to say, "I may not fully understand how I have been experienced by the people I love most, and I want to close that gap while I still can."
And most people are not trained for that. We're trained to protect the version of ourselves that was always clear enough, always fair enough, always good enough. The silence is a form of self-protection.
And then the silence becomes the estate's most destructive asset. Practical tips. So, what do you actually do with this? Because the danger of a conversation like this one is that it lands as a diagnosis with no prescription. You feel the weight of it and then nothing moves, which is precisely the pattern we are trying to interrupt.
The paralysis is its own kind of plan, and it compounds.
First, have the conversation while there is still time to have it well, not in a hospice room, not when the diagnosis has already been delivered and everyone is managing fear. Now, while there is no urgency distorting the room. The framework I keep coming back to is the what, the why, and the who. What you intend to do with your estate. Why you have made the decisions you have made, especially the ones that might feel surprising. And who needs to hear your intention in your own voice before a document has to carry it alone.
And that conversation does not have to be a formal summit. It can be a Sunday afternoon, a phone call that begins, "I have been thinking about some things, and I want to tell you where my head is." The goal is not a meeting. It is a communication. Those are completely different things.
Second, and this is specifically for adult children, for anyone who is not making the estate decisions but will live with them, raise the conversation yourself. Do not wait for your parents to open the door. The discomfort of initiating it is real. You worry you will seem greedy. You worry it signals something.
There is a reframe I have found genuinely useful. You are not asking about money. You are asking about preparedness. The language changes everything. Instead of "what is in the will," it becomes, "I want to understand your intentions so I can honor them properly when the time comes." That is not a presumptuous question. That is love, expressed in advance.
A close friend of mine avoided this conversation for years. Her parents were healthy. There was time, she thought. And so she said nothing, and they said nothing, and it became one of those subjects the family's collective silence had quietly categorized as off-limits. Her father died first. Her mother 18 months later. No comprehensive plan. The estate went into probate. Legal fees consumed more than a quarter of the assets. The family relationships consumed something you cannot put in a filing cabinet.
The cost of the silence was so much higher than the discomfort of the conversation would have been. It always is.
And third, write a legacy letter. Separate from the will, separate from any legal instrument. Your own voice, your own reasoning. What each person meant to you, what you actually saw in them, what you hope they will carry forward. It does not need to be formal. It needs to be honest.
I have started mine twice and stopped both times. Because what you are actually doing when you write it, you are saying out loud the things you always assumed were felt without being stated. And you are confronting the real possibility that they were not. That what felt obvious to you did not land as obvious to someone else. That is not administrative work. That is something entirely harder.
And the difficulty is precisely the point. For many families, the letter is more valuable than anything in the accounts.
And if this is the kind of conversation you want more of, honestly, just subscribe. We are here every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and we put a real amount of thought into each one.
Fourth, for families with complicated history, blended households, any significant unresolved tension, consider working with a financial therapist, not just a financial planner, someone trained specifically in the intersection of money and family psychology. The goal in that room is not a legal document. It is psychological safety, a held space where the conversation that has been avoided for a decade can finally, actually happen.
And fifth, make peace with the fact that you cannot fully control how it lands. You can have the conversation, you can write the letter, and someone may still receive it through the lens of their own grief, their own history, their own pain.
You can remove the ambiguity. You cannot remove the grief. What you can do is strip away every false surface that grief would otherwise attach to. The unanswered questions, the unexplained decisions, the silence that reads as preference. Remove those, and the family has a fighting chance of remaining one.
So our question for you today is, has your family ever had an honest conversation about what happens after you are gone? Or has the silence been doing all the talking so far?
3 years ago, I sat down with my mother. She was well, nothing was wrong. But I had been carrying this low-grade awareness that the conversation I actually needed to have with her was the one I kept finding reasons to postpone. And I realized one afternoon that the right moment was probably never going to arrive on its own, because the right moment always has a perfectly good reason to wait one more week. So I asked her, not about documents, not about the estate. I asked, "What do you want us to remember? About you, not your assets. What matters most to you about how we treat each other after you are gone?" She cried. I cried. We talked for nearly 2 hours about things that had been between us for 40 years without ever being named. The estate plan did not change, but something between us did. And that conversation, while she is still here, is the most valuable thing I have ever received from her.
I have been thinking about my own father differently since we built this episode. About the questions I never asked because I told myself there was more time, or that he was not the kind of man who spoke that way, or that it would be awkward and clumsy and we would both be relieved when it was over. None of that was the real reason. The real reason was that starting the conversation meant admitting it would end, and I was not ready to do that. What I have come to understand is that the preparation, the conversation, the letter, the transparency, is itself an act of love. And every year a family delays it, they are choosing, whether they realize it or not, to hand that weight to the people they care most about, without the context to carry it.
Tell us your answer in the comments. We read every one.
If today helped you, share it with someone who needs it. New episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. See you in the next one.
The most expensive silence in any family is the one about what comes after. Start that conversation now, while it can still be a conversation and not a courtroom.